If you're drawn to dark stories from forgotten towns, make sure to like and subscribe. My name is Levi Odman. I'm telling this story because what happened to me was a gradual fading of structure and direction. 3 months ago, I lost the shape of my life. I had spent years restoring colonial-era churches, brushing history off stone and breathing life back into crumbling places. I believed in what I did. I believed I was doing something that mattered. Then came the Culver Street project. I was assigned to oversee final inspections. I saw the missing invoices. I saw the materials that never arrived. I didn't sign them myself, but I didn't say anything either. A restoration trust in Manhattan collapsed in scandal. Names were named. Mine was excluded from the list, and I recognized my silence reflected in every news article. I stopped answering emails. Then I stopped reading them altogether. The guilt moved slowly. It seeped. It followed me through the hallways. It whispered while I slept. I stopped sleeping. One night, I found myself reading an old restoration forum I hadn't visited in years. Buried among old posts was a new message, anonymous, no replies. It said, "Seeking someone with reverence for the past. Southwest Territory, respect and discretion required, not listed, coordinates only." That was it. There was no company name or contact info, only latitude, longitude, and an invitation that didn't ask questions. I stared at the screen for maybe an hour. Then I packed. I wasn't looking for work. I was looking for somewhere my silence might mean something else. Somewhere far from stone buildings and ethics committees. Somewhere that needed me, not my resume. One morning, I walked out of my apartment, turned off my phone, canceled my cards, bought a rusted-out pickup from Craigslist, threw my old grad school tools into the back. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I had seen a post the night before in an old forum for historical restorers, something vague about an opportunity in the Southwest. It was not listed formally as a job. There was no title, no salary, only coordinates, and a single sentence. "We need someone who respects old things, no questions asked." I didn't apply. I just drove. Followed the longitude and latitude until the GPS gave up and the desert took over. I reached a location near the New Mexico border that wasn't listed on maps, a place called La Senda. When I entered La Senda, the heat seemed to hum. The wind carried a voice. Everything looked scorched, quiet, like it had chosen to stay alert in silence. 4 or 5 houses still stood. The rest just existed. In the center, on a slope of dry earth, stood the old mission building, Misión de los Ojos, the mission of the eyes. No one greeted me. The building was clean, but there were no signs of life inside. The windows weren't dusty, but the darkness behind them felt untouched. A man stood by the entrance, watching me. Tall, lean, lined face, white shirt, sun-bleached fedora. He held out a ring of keys. "Reyes," he said. "Don, we protect certain things here, between 1:13 and 3 a.m. An envelope will slide under your door each night. You take the package. Follow the route on the map. Follow the rules. Don't improvise." "I thought this was a restoration job," I said. "Some things we restore with our hands. Some simply by being present," he said. "You showed up. That's enough." The way he said it didn't feel like flattery. It felt like a verdict, like I had crossed a threshold without even realizing. Something settled in me. I did not feel absolved. I felt grounded. For the first time in months, someone had looked at me directly and said I was enough. That did something I wasn't ready to name. I nodded because I needed it to be true. I stepped inside. Boxes marked with strange symbols lined one wall. Each had a different mark, an eye, a feather, a spiral. I found myself staring at them longer than I meant to. Were they coded? Warnings? Assignments? I didn't ask. But part of me needed to know what each symbol meant and what kind of protection they were meant to offer. No names. The hallway felt cool, but it breathed. Silence leaked out of the walls. That night, I moved into my assigned room, a small converted supply space next to the mission, a bed, a sink, a rusted mirror. The walls were close and the floor creaked in uneven spots. Dust clung to the corners where even daylight hesitated to reach. The quiet here was dense, the kind that made your own breath sound invasive. It didn't feel like the city was quiet, which always had a hum beneath it. This silence had weight. It felt curated, arranged, as if someone had trimmed sound away from this place piece by piece. The silence in that room felt deliberate, as though someone had carefully shaped it to serve a purpose. The room didn't want to be filled with noise. Near midnight, an envelope slid under my door. Inside, a hand-drawn map with 6 delivery points marked and a short note. Take Route B, avoid the painted tree. I stared at the words. It was so specific, yet unexplained. What kind of tree? Why avoid it? Was it diseased? Was it sacred? Or was there something about it that remained unexplained? I tried to dismiss the questions, but they lingered in the corners of my mind. There was meaning behind this warning, and I was expected to obey without understanding. A second, smaller envelope came with it. Handwritten, labeled, rules. I gathered both envelopes and quietly opened the door, expecting perhaps to catch a glimpse of whoever had delivered them. The hallway was still. No footsteps or shifting shadows, not even the distant creak of the mission settling in the night. Just the air, thick and unmoving. Whoever had been there was gone, or had never been there at all. I read, deliveries must be completed between 1:13 a.m. and 3 a.m. Do not deliver outside this time window. Anything delivered at 3:01 is no longer protected. That precision unnerved me. Something clearly changed after that minute, something irreversible. At each stop, after placing the object down, speak the words aloud. You didn't see me. This felt like a ritual, not mere habit, like the words themselves carried weight that erased something behind me. When carrying the final object, do not look into any mirror, especially the rearview mirror. I noted it carefully. Mirrors held more than reflections in this place. They might retain impressions, intentions, or something while watching back. If you see an old-style eye symbol drawn in white paint on the road, turn back. That route is closed. If you pass through, you'll leave a trace. And if you leave a trace, something will follow it. Do not play music inside the vehicle, especially cassette or radio. The listeners find form in music. If the lyrics change, stop listening. This one lodged under my skin. If someone meets you at a delivery point and their name isn't listed on the route, do not hand them the package. They may claim to remember you. They may look like someone from your childhood, but they are not that person. That one made my hands cold. Trust carried risk in this place. I read the list twice. Each rule carried the tone of necessity, not tradition. It felt engineered, designed by someone who had seen the consequences firsthand. I could sense the weight of every instruction, the urgency behind the warnings. This was a system refined by risk, not rumor. At 1 a.m., the mission bell rang once. I sat up, already dressed, boots by the door. Each step felt like it had been rehearsed in a dream. Open the door, walk down the quiet hall, keys in hand. The truck waited in the dark, like it had been watching. I turned the ignition slowly. The engine exhaled, a low breath that matched the stillness of the night. I opened the rear, lifted the first box. Its weight was unfamiliar but firm, like something that didn't want to be moved, but knew it must. The symbols on its surface caught the moonlight. They looked etched, not painted. I placed the box in the truck bed, then the next, until all 6 were lined and secured. As I climbed in and pulled the map into my lap, the headlights lit the dust ahead. No wind, no bugs. The whole desert just paused, waiting to see if I'd follow through. I shifted into gear and pulled onto the road. The route had begun. The desert at night moved with subtle shifts. Nothing stood perfectly still. Cacti looked taller. Rocks leaned differently. Shadows hovered outside the headlights and whispered to each other. First stop, a trailer behind a collapsed barn. The road narrowed as I approached, gravel cracking under the tires. I brought the truck to a halt and gave 3 deliberate honks. The structure ahead stood uneven, its wood weathered by time and heat. No porch light, no signs of life. I stepped out, the box steady in my hands, and crossed the dirt yard. I placed the package gently on the steps and whispered the words I'd memorized. "You didn't see me." The stillness around me deepened. As I returned to the truck, I glanced in the direction of the barn. Near the corner, a pale shape lingered at the edge of shadow, motionless. I didn't investigate. I drove. Second stop, a single house set far back from the road, low to the ground with wind-worn siding. As I pulled in, a figure was already waiting by the door. A woman, barefoot, gray eyes sharp and alert. "Marta C.," she said quietly. Her voice was even, her presence still. I stepped out and handed over the box through the passenger window, keeping to protocol. She accepted it with a nod and turned back inside without another word. I watched the door close before shifting back into gear. Third stop, the tree. It stood alone in a clearing, trunk thick, bark split with age. As the headlights swept over it, I saw the mark, a white eye painted at chest height. The shape was precise, it carried age, yet the paint remained clear. This was Rule 4. If the eye appeared, I had to turn back. That route was no longer safe. I stopped well back from it. The engine idled briefly before I cut it off. There was no sound around us. I let the silence settle, then slowly reversed down the road, turning carefully until the mark was no longer visible in the mirror or windshield. When the mission bell rang again at 3 a.m., I was already on my way back. The route had unfolded without disruption. No broken rules, no delays. A part of me felt grounded by that, like I'd passed a first test. Yet even in that success, the weight of it all pressed against me. The quiet, the rules, the shapes in the dark. Each detail carried meaning. They were signals, and I was now living inside their meaning. Back in my room, I washed my hands 3 times, unplugged the nightlight above the mirror, folded the rules, placed them beside the bed. My heart was learning a new language. In the morning, I knew there would be another envelope. When I woke that evening, my body felt heavier than it had the night before. Sleep hadn't come easily, and what little rest I managed left behind a dull pressure in my temples. I sat at the edge of the bed, letting the room adjust around me, letting myself feel the stillness. Nothing had followed me into the room, or at least, nothing I could see. But I couldn't shake the thought that something had stayed behind, something left open. The second envelope came earlier than I expected. This time, the map had 5 marked locations, each deeper into the outskirts than the night before. One point was entirely off-road, circled twice in red pencil. The handwriting next to it read, "Check tires before approach." No refuel nearby. I studied the route in silence. The desert beyond La Senda stretched out like forgotten breath, brittle soil, wind-swept gullies, stretches of road that faded into dust and heat. This job had rules. The rules had weight. That red circle felt like it marked something more than a location. It defined an intent, something that demanded a decision. I stepped into the garage. The mission's tools were old but serviceable. I checked the tire pressure, packed extra water, and rechecked the straps on each box. Tonight's delivery felt different. The symbols carved into the crates were deeper. One showed a 3-pronged claw, another a broken infinity loop. I paused as I studied them. Each symbol looked deliberate, etched with purpose. I found myself wondering why they were different. What did each one signify? They weren't just aesthetic choices. Their placement, their depth, the way the grain of the wood framed them. They meant something. These weren't decorations. They weren't signs of tradition. They were warnings. They were instructions, maybe even identifiers. I tightened the straps again, this time with more care. At exactly 1 a.m., the bell rang again. The sound was deeper tonight, as though it had traveled further to reach me. I got in the truck and turned the ignition. The engine rumbled low. Gravel churned as I rolled onto the main road, headlights sweeping across dry brush and shadowed canyons. The first stop brought me to an abandoned gas station at the edge of town, its windows boarded with old plywood, nails rusted to orange halos. The station's sign was cracked, swinging lightly in the breeze, creaking as though it was still calling to cars that would never return. I pulled up carefully, angled the truck to face the road in case I needed to leave quickly. I stepped onto the concrete, the surface uneven and broken, weeds curling up through the cracks. The box was heavier than it looked. I placed it gently against the shuttered doorway and stepped back. I whispered the phrase, "You didn't see me." The silence that followed carried something tense and suspended, like a held breath. I stood for a moment, waiting to see if the shadows would move. Nothing did. I turned around and walked back to the truck. The sound of my boots against the concrete echoed longer than it should have. I got in and drove. The second delivery point was a cattle fence near what used to be a ranch. Most of the wooden posts had collapsed. The gate was twisted, its metal hinges bent. The fence looked like it had been forgotten for years, gnawed at by termites and desert winds. I pulled over, headlights tracing across dead grass, and the remains of a barn leaning at an unnatural angle. The wind here moved strangely, low and constant, almost sideways, like it was trying to guide something around the edges of the property. I carried the box to the corner of the fence, where the post still stood mostly upright. I placed the box at its base and stood up straight. My eyes swept across the darkness. I couldn't see anything unusual, but that didn't bring comfort. I said the words again, clear this time. "You didn't see me." I held my breath for a moment. Nothing moved. The silence pressed down with weight. I turned to head back, but something about the air made me walk slower, more carefully. I couldn't tell if it was the way the grass angled toward the fence or the way my breath felt watched. The crunch of gravel beneath my boots sounded sharper now, louder. I glanced at the empty barn again, its shadow longer than I remembered. As I climbed into the truck, I kept my eyes ahead. My hands were steady, but my mind searched every corner of that place, storing it like a memory I might need to escape again. The third stop was listed only with coordinates, without any street name or landmark to guide me. The GPS drew a thin gray line through what looked like an open field, past a service road barely maintained. As I followed the path, the brush thickened and the road narrowed. Branches scraped the sides of the truck, dry and sharp like claws testing skin. At the location, a clearing opened. Half-collapsed sheds sat near the tree line, rusted-out metal and rotting boards leaning into one another like drunks. The trees around the edge formed a perfect circle. There was no house, no door, just a wooden post in the center, and at its base a platform made of stone. I got out with the third box, its surface colder than the others. I stepped into the clearing. The wind died completely. The trees didn't move. Nothing did. I placed the box down carefully on the stone platform. I stood. The silence around me was thick, filled with something dense and expectant, like something was waiting. I whispered the phrase, "You didn't see me." The trees behind me made a sound then, a creaking like old wood shifting in its sleep. I turned. A branch near the base of one of the trees bent downward, slowly, without force, as though it had been listening. I walked backward until I reached the truck. Only then did I turn, get in, and drive to the next point. The fourth stop came on a sunken road flanked by dead brush and the husk of what once might have been a stone bridge. The air felt denser there, as if layered with something invisible that clung to the windshield. I slowed to a crawl, headlights piercing the stillness with a dry yellow beam. Just ahead, the terrain dipped gently, and that's when I saw it. A white symbol on the broken asphalt. A wide, crude eye, drawn thick, the kind of shape a human hand wouldn't naturally make. It wasn't painted like graffiti. It was sunken into the cracks, as if burned in and sealed by dust. The way it caught the light made it pulse faintly. Rule 4 screamed in my head. I hit reverse. The tires climbed the incline, and then the back right dropped with a violent jolt. A wet hiss followed. The truck sagged. I stepped out, flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. The rocks underfoot shifted with each step. I moved slowly to the rear. The tire looked shredded, the rubber torn open in uneven strips. But the tire wasn't what froze me. Footprints. There were my boot prints, sure, but beside them, no more than inches away, were barefoot impressions, smaller than a child's. The toes pressed deep into the grit. They overlapped mine in places, as if something had been walking alongside me without a sound. Their orientation was wrong. The toes pointed inward, like it was facing me, like it had been mirroring my steps. I scanned the roadside with the beam of the flashlight, my breath pinched tight in my throat. The wind made a low, sweeping sound, but there was no breeze on my skin. It was as if the wind were only audible, not real. A thin, clicking sound echoed off the rocks behind the truck. Then silence, thick and waiting. The kind of silence that asks questions. I crouched beside the wheel well, tools in hand, every motion deliberate. The air pressed in, thick with expectation. My hands moved fast, guided by fear more than focus. The flashlight beam never left the tire, but as I unscrewed the last lug nut, my eyes caught something again in the dirt. Those barefoot prints, too small to be mine, too close, still facing me, still overlapping. And the eye symbol, burned into the asphalt, stayed just within reach of the headlights, pulsing like a vein under skin. It was more than a warning. It was a mark, maybe a gateway, maybe a lock that I had disturbed by getting too close. My mind scrambled for answers. Who or what had walked beside me? Why did the tracks appear only after the blowout? Had it been waiting in that hollow space between silence and sound? Then I heard it, breathing. Short, measured. It didn't rise from my chest. It didn't belong to me. It came from the direction of the truck bed, as if someone crouched behind the tailgate, matching my movements. My spine locked. My breath came in short, silent pulls. I didn't dare turn my head. Each second stretched tight. My hands finished the bolt by instinct, muscle memory working ahead of thought. I stood up slowly, legs tense, back rigid like glass. I glanced down to make sure my tools weren't left behind, though I barely saw them. Every movement felt exposed, like I was stepping through light, that something else was watching. I took a step to the side. My foot landed too hard. The crunch of gravel made me flinch. Another step back. My shoulder brushed the side mirror and I recoiled. I reached for the door handle, opened it fast, climbed in, slammed the door with more force than needed. My fingers shook on the ignition. I turned the key. The engine rumbled. I set my eyes on the road, hands at 10 and 2. I did not breathe until the tires started to roll. And I drove, eyes ahead. The rearview mirror stayed untouched, a surface I refused to acknowledge. The fifth stop came just before 2:50 a.m. A one-story house sat back from the road. Its roof sloped, shingles curled inward like dried leaves. The porch light was dead. The truck's headlights cast long, dull beams that barely touched the front steps. A woman stood there. I slowed the truck to a crawl. My foot hovered over the brake as I scanned the house. The figure didn't move. Her frame was thin, her hair shoulder length. The fabric of her hoodie looked worn down by time. Colorless in the headlights, its texture hinted at countless washes. Familiar. I parked, cut the engine. The silence was immediate and complete. I opened the door, and the night met me with stillness. The box in my arms felt heavier than the others had. My boots crunched against the gravel. The sound stretched across the lot like glass dragging underfoot. She watched without blinking. She smiled and said, "Levi?" The voice twisted something in me. Familiar. In the way it carried a tone I recognized without knowing why. I knew it, or I had known something close to it. Her voice took me back to college days in Chicago. Her name was Alana. We met during a film studies course I barely passed. spent afternoons chain-smoking by the lake and watching planes descend over the skyline. I hadn't seen or spoken to her in over a decade. "What's your name?" She tilted her head. "Come on, don't be like that. You remember me?" I stepped out slowly, box in my arms. "Your name. Please. You told me you'd call. Remember the bench near the river?" Rule 6. I didn't move closer. Her hand extended. Her shadow didn't follow. The light behind her was broken, but even without backlight, the outline of her figure seemed disconnected from the ground. Her fingers trembled slightly, each joint shifting like they were practicing the idea of movement, as if remembering how to shape themselves into fingers. "You're not on the manifest," I said, my voice steady though my pulse wasn't. Her smile vanished. Her lips parted slightly, but there was no breath or sound, only the silent forming of the words. "Why did you forget me?" I felt the weight of the box shift in my arms as I stepped back. Her eyes didn't blink. Her posture didn't change. It was as though she had been built to stay in that exact pose. The stillness of her form made everything around her seem more alive. The dust, the distant hum of wind, the faint creak of wood under the porch. I moved slowly, box held tight, and opened the truck door without taking my eyes off her. She didn't follow, but her shadow seemed to stretch as I walked, reaching across the gravel toward me even though the porch light remained dead. I placed the box in the passenger seat, hands tense, slammed the door shut with more force than needed, started the engine. The dashboard lit up dimly, and I eased into reverse. As the truck rolled away, I glanced into the rearview mirror. She was still standing, but behind her, rising from the darkness of the house's open doorway, something uncoiled upward. Its form towered above her, shadow stretched, limbs long and uneven. The head tilted in a motion too slow to be human, an observing presence with no face. Watching. I pressed the accelerator harder, breath held, and didn't look back again. The road narrowed and sand crept across the shoulders. Just ahead, a faint click echoed through the cabin. The cassette deck had engaged. I hadn't touched it. My hands were locked on the wheel. A low hiss came through the speakers, followed by the soft rise of a melody I hadn't heard in years. It was an old country. My father used to sing it, off-key, during long drives when I was a child. The sound pulled something loose in my chest, something vulnerable. For a brief moment, I let it be. I listened. Then the lyrics shifted. "You left her there, in the porch light, when her name still fit your mouth." I sat up straighter. My grip tightened. The temperature inside the truck began to change. The windshield fogged around the edges first, then filled. On the inside, 5 symmetrical handprints appeared, pressed flat, each one dragging slowly upward. I reached for the stop button. It gave under my finger, but nothing stopped. Behind the warped lyrics, another sound emerged. A hum, low and pulsing. Not musical, not melodic. A second voice occupied the song's spaces. It had no words, only the weight of presence. The engine coughed once. Lights on the dashboard flickered. I pulled the truck over, tires cutting a soft trench in the dust. Killed the ignition. The dashboard went dark, but the music played on. I unplugged the stereo, yanked the cables free one by one until nothing remained connected. Still, the voice continued. Still, the melody lingered. From behind, in the bed of the truck, came a shift. A scraping sound, wood over metal. Something moved, something aware. I whispered the phrase. "You didn't see me." Everything stopped. The music cut off mid-syllable. The air cleared. I drove the rest of the way with the window open, the cold rushing in, anchoring me to the world outside. When I returned, the building was dark. No bell rang, no porch light flicked on. Inside, my room was no longer how I left it. The mirror, which I'd carefully taped and covered, was exposed. The cloth I had placed over it was now folded neatly on the desk. My reflection met me. Its movements carried a hesitation that didn't match mine, a subtle lag as though it responded slightly after I did. My eyes blinked out of rhythm. My breath misted against the glass a moment after I exhaled. On the bed lay a new envelope. It read, "You left a trace." Below, scrawled in darker ink, "You'll need to clean it before the next run." When I woke, my mouth tasted of metal and dust. My back ached, though I didn't remember twisting wrong. The room was quiet. No bell had rung. No sound came from the hallway. Still, I knew something had arrived. On the floor by the door, a new envelope. Dark gray this time, its edges frayed. I picked it up slowly, aware of how the paper felt against my skin, coarse, heavier than before. My stomach tightened. Something was foreboding about this one, like it felt different from a regular delivery, as if it had come not by routine, but with specific intent and purpose. Inside was no map, no route, only a folded sheet with my name written across the top in thick graphite. Beneath it, a short sentence. "If they find you, burn this inside a closed circle." My throat dried. Who were they? Had I already been seen? Was this warning too late? Taped to the note was a cloth pouch, stitched at the mouth with copper wire. I untied it and poured a pinch of the contents into my hand. Fine gray powder, like crushed bone or cooled ash. It carried no scent, but it clung to the skin. It felt old, like it remembered something. Holding it filled me with a quiet dread. Whatever this was for, it carried the weight of purpose. It was preparation for something worse. I went to the garage. The truck sat with a familiarity that didn't feel reassuring anymore. The mirrors had shifted inward, angled strangely, almost bent beyond proper alignment. One mirror showed the opposite wall. The other stared directly into the truck's cab. The driver's side door wasn't shut all the way. I hadn't left it like that. When I pulled it open, a sound met me. It wasn't mechanical. It carried the subtle texture of a whisper. Not formed into a word, just the distinct sensation that something unseen had passed close, brushing by my ear with intent. The seat was damp. On the window, a foggy print. Not from fingers. A single oval, wide set, like a heel or a soft pad. I wiped it away with the sleeve of my shirt and forced the key into the ignition. The dashboard lit up. Static buzzed faintly from the dead radio. I didn't touch it. I packed the pouch of powder into the glove compartment and pulled out slowly onto the road. The first location on the new list, this time written on the back of the envelope, was listed only by grid coordinates. I followed them into a stretch of gravel road behind the hills, where mesquite trees clawed the sky and the air carried the scent of rust. I parked near an old way station, just the frame of a building now. Wood splintered into itself, beams leaning like ribs exposed. The wind moved around me, not through. I stepped out with the first crate in hand. The dirt beneath my boots gave slightly, brittle with dryness. As I moved across the lot, the wind that had followed me all evening disappeared. What remained was not stillness, but something strained. It was as if the silence had been waiting, coiled and alert. Each step left a clear, sharp imprint in the dust. The collapsed frame of the building loomed ahead, skeletal and tilting inward. I reached the edge of the former doorway and lowered the crate with care. My pulse pressed against the inside of my ears. Above me, the air shifted with a sharp tension. A dry rustle skittered across the rooftop, the sound distinct and animal, like claws scraping over gravel. It moved quickly, purposeful. Then, with a low thud, something heavy dropped to my left. The weight of it landed with focus, just outside my field of view. I turned my head slowly. My chest felt like it had tightened into stone. The dirt where the thing had landed stirred and settled, forming two narrow trails, one directly behind me, the other curling to the right. Their arc and spacing didn't follow any human gait. Something had studied me before making its approach. My lips moved with instinct. "You didn't see me." The words came out soft, as if sound itself resisted carrying them. A cold breath moved over the lot, as though the air itself recoiled. The warm skin of the evening peeled away, and I began stepping back. A slam shattered the quiet. The roof of the truck groaned under impact. The entire frame swayed. I saw the metal bend in places it wasn't meant to. Before I could react, another slam followed, harder, hungrier. The windshield fractured inward, veins of cracks webbing from a single dark point. I heard dragging above, slow, deliberate, not haphazard. The scrape moved across the roof in long, stretched pulls. It demanded more than entry. It sought recognition, presence, a moment of shared awareness. I ran. I reached the truck, yanked the door, and threw myself inside. The crate behind me burst open in the scramble, contents scattering across the dirt like bones tossed by something unseen. The roof above creaked again, heavier now. I slammed the door shut, jammed the key into the ignition, and threw the truck into reverse. Gravel spit under the tires as the vehicle bucked backward. I kept my eyes ahead. I didn't need the mirrors. I could feel the thing above retreating just as slowly as it had arrived. The windshield continued to fracture, threads spreading outward like veins or frost. The cracks weren't from pressure. They were a symptom, the residue of something looking back at me from the glass. Whatever had been watching, whatever had followed me here, it no longer hovered at the edge of knowing. It had learned where I ended and where it could begin. The second stop brought me to a narrow ditch between two dead trees, both of them scorched at the base as if fire had taken root inside their bark. The note had described this stop with a single symbol, an inverted triangle with 3 dots. No address, no time marker. As I parked, the wind blew steadily through the trees, and the branches didn't move. The crate sat heavier than the last, pulling down on my arms with a subtle, growing weight. As I stepped toward the tree line, something moved ahead. A figure emerged from between the scorched trunks, slight and hunched, staggering with each step. It dragged one leg behind in an uneven rhythm, out of sync with the natural sounds around us. Each movement was slow, its body swaying from side to side without ever drawing closer. I stopped mid-step, clutching the crate tighter, my fingers pressing against the wood until they ached. The air had shifted. The figure paused. Then it spoke. "Leave." It said my name, but it didn't sound like a voice meant to say anything. The syllables stretched and cracked, as if a broken mouth struggled to form something it had only heard secondhand. It was wrong in a way that reached beyond volume or tone, settling instead in the intent behind it. The crate trembled, or maybe that was my body reacting to the way it echoed inside my ears. I couldn't speak. The phrase I'd memorized hovered on my lips. I couldn't move. The figure crouched. Its hands touched the dirt, held there, waiting. The silence between us became a line drawn in tension. I whispered, "You didn't see me." The wind stopped. The figure twitched. It hadn't backed away, just flexed inward like a nerve reacting to pain, a small seizure of form waiting to solidify again. I moved toward the marker stone, a flat rock etched with the same triangle and dot symbol. I placed the crate and stepped back, a sound behind me, clicking, like bones against wood. I turned. The figure stood again, now much closer. Within 15 steps, it tilted its head. The skin on its face didn't appear aged or scarred. It looked recently shaped, as if memory had been used to sculpt it. It opened its mouth and something moved inside. Not a tongue, something else. I reached for my pocket, took out the powder pouch. I scattered a line in a circle around me, then lit a match. The flame caught the edge of the powder, and the ring flared white. The figure paused, then hissed. A second later it turned, jerking, and disappeared behind the tree. I stayed inside the ring, breath ragged, eyes locked on where it had vanished. My heart thundered. each beat vibrating in my limbs. The smoke curled up from the scorched circle, carrying the metallic scent of the powder and the acrid sting of burning fear. My hands shook. My legs felt numb. I couldn't tell if I was more terrified by the thing itself or by the realization that this was no longer strange. It was becoming a part of my night. When I finally stepped out, the wind returned, brushing against the back of my neck with a chill that felt too precise, like breath. I didn't dare turn around, not until I was inside the truck, door locked, hands trembling on the wheel. The third stop was deeper inland. No map marked it. I followed signs carved into rocks, arrows, scratches, etched symbols that pulsed faintly under the truck's lights. The route narrowed into a hollow where the moon barely reached the ground. A platform stood in the middle of a stone clearing. The crate in the back had begun to shake. It didn't thrash, just shifted enough to shift its weight as if something inside adjusted itself. I got out, carried it slowly. The lid gave a tiny groan. I didn't look inside. I placed it on the platform. Then it burst open. A blur. Gray, sinewed, small. It darted out and landed near my feet. It stood no taller than a fire hydrant. Its skin looked like dried clay, and in its chest a small indent where a heart might be. It stared up at me with hollow eye sockets. It opened its mouth, and what came out stopped the breath in my chest. "Help me," it said, using my voice. My body froze. My knees locked in place. The sound was too precise, intonation, rhythm, every nuance matched how I'd spoken in moments of desperation. But I hadn't spoken. Again, it repeated, "Help me." Same tone, same breathless plea. Yet my mouth had stayed shut. A chill ran through me, deep and internal, like something inside had recognized the echo before my brain did. I fumbled for the powder pouch, nearly dropping it in the process. My fingers worked quickly, almost on their own. I poured a ring on the ground, hand trembling, then struck the match. The circle lit up, a sharp flare of white and smoke. It coiled around me in a low wall of scentless fire. The creature didn't scream. It reacted as if touched by a memory. Its frame began to shiver, not in pain but in the unmaking of form. Its edges collapsed inward. Then its torso crumbled, folding like dry ash, collapsing into itself grain by grain. The wind didn't hesitate. It carried the dust away in a soft spiral. I fell to my knees, my breathing ragged. My hands were covered in the remnants, gray, soft, and warm from whatever it had once been. In my ears, my own voice still lingered, impossibly low and drawn out. I knelt there, surrounded by smoke and residue, thinking of nothing and everything at once. Of the boundary between mimicry and memory, of what part of me it had known well enough to speak in my words. By the time I returned to the compound, the sky had begun to lighten. Faint pinks touched the horizon and the door to my room hung slightly ajar. Inside, the mirror was uncovered. Again. This time, something had shifted. I stepped in front of the mirror and froze. There were two reflections. The first mirrored my movements precisely. The second, a faint echo, blinked half a second too late, its eyes lagging behind mine as if it was trying to keep up and failing. The air in the room thickened. A tight pressure closed in around my chest and my throat caught with the weight of something that wasn't entirely physical. My hands twitched at my sides. I stepped closer to the mirror, needing to confirm what I saw. Both versions of me blinked again, one too late, one too aware. I stared hard, searching for anything that could be explained by fatigue, by paranoia, by something reasonable. But this was no trick of light. This was a presence. This was memory taking shape in glass. Inside my head, panic built like steam. I felt trapped in a horror film I didn't remember auditioning for. Each night blurred into a waking nightmare. The rituals, the rules, the things that moved just beyond what I could name. My breathing turned shallow. I couldn't shake the question growing inside me. How much longer could I hold myself together? How many more of these nights before something inside me slipped and didn't come back? The mirror didn't answer. It only waited. On the bed lay a note. The handwriting was sharp, angled with purpose. You left a trace. Below it, another line, written in darker ink. They remember your shape now. I stood there, staring at the mirror, unable to move, unable to turn away. My shape, my name, my voice. Something had watched too closely, and now it carried a part of me with it. The fourth night began with silence that felt manufactured, as if someone had vacuumed the air out of the compound. I awoke before the bell, but the moment I opened my eyes, I knew it wouldn't ring tonight. My limbs were heavy. The corners of the room held a darker shade of shadow, and the single bulb above me flickered once before settling into a pale, steady glow. There was no envelope at the door, no map, no coordinates, but taped to the mirror, now fully uncovered, was a slip of paper, folded with extreme precision. I peeled it off slowly. The handwriting this time wasn't ink. It had been etched into the paper itself, like pressure pressed into wood grain. You must choose. That was all it said. But beneath the mirror, laid neatly across the dresser, were two things. A second pouch, nearly identical to the first, but tied with red thread instead of copper wire, and a cassette tape with no label, no markings. I stared at them. My breath didn't come easily. I didn't know what the red thread meant. I didn't know who had left the cassette or why it had appeared after I'd spent the last delivery fighting something that had spoken with my voice. All I knew was that something had shifted. I took the red-threaded pouch and held it in my hand. The powder inside wasn't gray this time. It was dark, granular, and had the faint scent of iron. The cassette went into my jacket pocket, untouched. Out in the garage, the truck sat beneath the halogen lamp, coated in a thin layer of dust that hadn't been there the night before. The windshield had fully spidered now. White cracks ran through every inch of the glass, yet I could still see out. It did not hinder my vision. It distorted it slightly, creating just enough motion in the edges of my sight to make shapes appear to move when they didn't. I stepped into the cab, careful not to shift the mirrors. The driver's side mirror reflected only the inside of the cab now, looping my face back at me with an unsettling stillness. The rearview mirror had turned toward the back seat again. I had realigned it last night with deliberate force, but there it was, watching behind me. I paused, staring at it. Of all the wrongness I'd experienced so far, this felt like the most grounded kind of strange, as if compared to mirrors whispering secrets and photographs from forgotten years. A disobedient piece of glass was almost a relief. Almost. A single white envelope sat on the dashboard, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it before anything else could happen. I picked it up, peeled it open, and found a single line etched on a stiff card. 3 stops. Deliver quickly. Do not hesitate. If you hesitate, it sees you. The warning didn't feel metaphorical. It struck like instruction, sharp and procedural, something that came from whoever was orchestrating these nights. My thumb hovered over the card as I read the smaller text printed underneath. Play the tape if you're ready to understand. The cassette in my jacket seemed to grow heavier at that moment, as though it had waited to be noticed again. I left it where it was. My fingers pressed the ignition. The truck coughed once and then started with a low groan, its engine vibrating like something ancient being asked to move. I shifted into gear and pulled away, the envelope still in my hand. The first stop was west of the compound, toward a burned-out strip of trailer homes. The place hadn't been lived in for years. Most of the structures had collapsed into themselves, insulation and wire exposed like tendons from old skin. I parked in front of the largest unit, one that still had part of a roof, and grabbed the crate. Inside the crate, the item was different. It wasn't a charm, it wasn't an offering, it was a mirror, small, circular, handheld. The back was etched in symbols, spirals, lines, and something like a tree without branches. It rattled slightly when I picked it up. As I stepped toward the trailer, the sky dimmed. The sky didn't carry the warm hues of sunset. It simply lost its color, becoming a washed-out gray as if a thick lens had been lowered over the world. Like a lens had been lowered over the world. My ears popped, my vision narrowed. I placed the mirror on the trailer's single remaining step, then whispered, "You didn't see me." As I stepped away, the wind howled. It wasn't just a gust of wind. The air carried weight and presence, a shape that cut through the silence with force. It moved like a thing with intention, and from it came a sound. It wasn't words formed by a throat, but something raw and desperate that clawed through the silence like a scream torn from something that didn't have a mouth, as if forced through something that lacked a mouth to form it properly. The scream pierced without echo, landing deep in my chest. I didn't run. I walked slowly back to the truck, hand on the pouch with the red thread. But I didn't open it. Not yet. The second stop was further inland, past an abandoned way station. The road had lost its skin of pavement long ago, leaving only deep ruts carved by years of forgotten traffic. The trees closed in above, forming a canopy that swallowed what was left of the day's fading light. It should have been early evening, but the sun was nowhere to be found. The sky had turned to slate. There were no coordinates for this delivery, no instruction beyond instinct. I drove until the air grew too still, too dense. That's when I stopped. My breath felt caged in my chest. My mind, once skeptical and disoriented on that first night, had adapted into something more primal, responsive, and resigned. I knew what it meant when the world fell into that kind of silence. I walked to the back and opened the latch. The second crate was smaller than the first and wrapped in tightly folded black cloth. It was almost reverent in its presentation. I reached for it with steady hands, the kind of steadiness that only comes from fear that has stopped being a reaction and become routine. But as I lifted it, I felt the air behind me shift, subtle and sudden, as if something large had adjusted its weight. I froze, blood rushing to my ears. No sound, no footsteps, just that invisible ripple through the space behind my back. I turned slowly, the crate still in hand. Nothing was there, nothing visible, but the absence pressed in like a wall. I didn't speak. I just listened, lungs tight, waiting to see if the silence would break. I placed the crate on a stump. The cloth opened as it hit the surface. Inside, a photograph. My face, but not from now, from years ago. I was smiling, a true smile, not the hollow one I'd started using since arriving here. On the back, written in the same pressure-etched script, "You left this behind." I whispered the phrase. "You didn't see me." The trees behind me groaned. The bark peeled upward. I heard movement beneath the dirt. I turned to head back toward the truck, but the moment I reached the edge of the clearing, I wasn't alone. A figure stood in front of the vehicle. She was familiar. Her voice, her posture, even the mole on her cheek. It was my former neighbor from the town I'd left behind. She smiled gently and asked if I remembered her. I didn't answer. Every part of me screamed that this wasn't her. She began to talk about my childhood, specific details that only someone close to me would know. The sound of her voice rattled something deep in my chest, pulling at the part of me that still remembered what it felt like to be safe. But her eyes didn't blink. Her hands didn't move. It was like a person sketched from memory, missing small pieces. I stepped around her slowly, close enough to see the delicate rise and fall of her chest, the static gloss in her eyes. Her skin didn't look like skin anymore, too smooth, too consistent, like porcelain with warmth beneath it. I held my breath as I passed, half expecting her hand to reach out and catch my sleeve. She didn't move, but the space between us crackled like it held electricity, the kind you don't see, only feel. My footfall on the gravel felt deafening in that silence. I glanced back once. Her head had turned slightly, just enough to keep me in her peripheral vision. That was somehow worse than if she'd lunged. I didn't run, I walked. But my entire spine tensed until I was back in the driver's seat with the door locked and the engine idling. Inside the truck, I saw something on the windshield, a handprint. Palm down, fingers long, nails too dark. When I pressed my fingers to it, a heat burned beneath my shirt. At first it felt like a pinprick of heat, sharp, precise, as if someone had pressed a hot wire to my skin. I yanked the fabric of my shirt aside and saw it forming in real time. The skin reddened, blistered, then sank into itself, shaping a tight circle surrounded by interlocking lines, each detail burned in with impossible precision. The area sizzled faintly, the sound low and intimate, like water dropped on a stove coil. As the symbol completed itself, a raised texture emerged, skin that no longer felt like mine, thicker, ridged. It pulsed slowly, as though it had a rhythm of its own, independent of my heartbeat. I touched it, half expecting pain, but it didn't hurt. It throbbed with awareness. Something had touched me. Something had claimed space on me. My mind reeled. First, it had been rules. Then, it had been illusions. Now, it was touch, contact. It was escalating, and I couldn't see the line between hallucination and reality anymore. I tried to think back to that first night when I was just a man desperate for purpose, willing to deliver packages through haunted woods to forget his own life. Now, every delivery was an interrogation, every face a test, every word an echo. I could no longer trust what I heard or who I saw. People spoke to me at the delivery sites. Some used names from my past. One man called me by a nickname no one else ever knew. They smiled in familiar ways. Their voices came with memories, ones I hadn't summoned in years. But something in my chest told me they were only acting, that whatever they were, they had learned my face, my history, and now they were trying to wear it like clothing. The tape was the only way forward. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached into my jacket and retrieved it. The plastic shell felt warm, almost as if it had absorbed body heat or generated its own. I slid it into the radio, the mechanism swallowing it with a click that echoed unnaturally in the tight cab. The speakers hissed with static. Then my own voice came through, flat and grainy, yet undeniably mine. "You shouldn't have come here." I stared at the dashboard, unsure if I had recorded this without remembering or if something had taken my voice. Then another voice spoke, one that sounded like mine but was subtly off, as if passed through someone else's mouth. "You were meant to deliver, not to know, but now you've been seen. Now you're shaped." Static surged again, longer this time, then silence. Then a new voice, low, layered and echoing, as though many mouths were speaking at once. "We know what you are now, and we know what you fear." The temperature in the cab dropped. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield. I watched as numbers, coordinates, burned themselves onto the glass in thin beams of light. They etched like frost, clear and deliberate. I didn't touch them. I simply watched, heart racing, as my next destination revealed itself without words, without question. Something had changed. The game I thought I was playing had shifted into something else entirely. I turned the ignition, tires crunching gravel, the sound swallowed by the trees as I drove toward the unknown. I drove along the winding dirt path until the trees suddenly broke away, revealing a bowl-shaped clearing surrounded by dense, leaning pines. The headlights illuminated a flat expanse in the center, a wide stone circle carved directly into the earth. Ancient symbols marked the perimeter, each one etched deep into the rock like they had been gouged out with heat rather than tools. The symbols shimmered faintly, not with light, but with presence. In the center of the circle stood a figure, tall and skeletal in shape, composed of swirling ash and thick smoke. Its outline was unstable, flickering, as if the air itself resisted giving it form. Then, slowly, it took on my face, my posture, my very stance. It had taken more than just my shape. It had become me, down to the smallest twitch of my eye, the way I stood, the way my shoulders rose when I breathed. It didn't copy, it replaced. I opened the truck door and stepped down with deliberate care. The pouch was in my hand, tied tightly with the red thread. My fingers clenched around it, the powder inside shifting like dry sand. I approached the circle, every step sinking slightly into the soft soil. The figure turned to face me. It did not blink. It did not speak. I stepped to the outer ring and struck the flint against the oil-soaked threads. A hiss, a flicker, and then a rapid chain of fire ignited the full circle. Flames leapt up around the stone, creating a barrier of light. The figure stepped forward again and halted at the flame, its face twisted into a grin. My grin. It was unnerving in its familiarity, yet exaggerated in a way that made the gesture cruel. Its lips moved as if to say something, but no sound came. Then, just as quickly as it had formed, the figure unraveled, collapsing into a cloud of gray that scattered like dust on the wind. I remained still, standing inside the circle, heart pounding. Nothing else moved. The cassette inside the truck began to whir again. The voice returned, this time slower, more deliberate. One more night, then choose. The words clung to my thoughts as I stood by the open truck door. Choose what? Stay and unravel whatever this ritual had become, or turn away and risk taking all of it with me. My body was tired, from the physical wear of the journey and from the mental strain of holding myself together against the mounting dread and distortions that scratched at the edges of my thoughts. My mind weighed two paths. If I kept going, I might find answers about the figures, the symbols, the voices that wore my face. But continuing meant accepting that this would never again be a normal job. It had crossed into something else. And if I walked away? Could I walk away? Would I bring whatever this was back into the world I once knew? Would the mark on my chest fade or follow? The idea of going back seemed comforting, but hollow. I didn't know if anything of me was left to return. Everything in me leaned forward and back at once. My fingers curled tighter around the doorframe. I needed to know, but I wasn't sure if that meant going deeper or trying to escape before it was too late. The flames flickered out one by one, leaving behind a faint trace of smoke and warmth. I turned, slowly walking back across the clearing. Each footstep felt weighted, as if the ground wanted me to stay. At the truck, I opened the door and paused. My hands were coated in a soft gray residue. I lifted them into the cabin light. Ash, again. My heart beat heavy beneath the scorched symbol on my chest. My thoughts spiraled. I had entered a nightmare where memory, self, and fear had become tools in someone else's hands. I didn't know how many more nights I could walk through without losing the last piece of myself still untouched. Chapter 5. The morning arrived without a sound. The air was still, not a single wing beat, no leaves stirred. The usual bell that signaled morning was absent. I sat up in the cot with my back slick against the sheets. The air tasted metallic. My chest burned with a heat that emerged from within. I pulled my shirt aside. The symbol had changed. It wasn't just raised now. It moved, subtly, with the rhythm of breath or thought, a slow undulation that pulled at my focus. The lines had deepened, now marked with a faint red glow along the edges. Whatever had marked me last night hadn't stopped working after I fell asleep. It had grown. I rose to my feet with steadier balance than usual. My legs felt different, lighter, stronger. The exhaustion that had followed me since the first delivery was gone. In its place was something close to alertness, but colder, more precise. What filled me wasn't rest. It was a sharpened clarity, stripped of warmth. The compound's door was already open when I reached it. There was no instruction slip, no container, no guide. The truck waited, sitting under the sunless sky like a sealed casket. I opened the door and found a small box on the driver's seat. Inside was a cassette and a red-threaded cloth folded neatly around what looked like bone dust. When I touched the pouch, a sharp pulse went through my hand and into the symbol on my chest. It pulsed sharply through my hand and into my chest, not with pain, but with a clear signal. A recognition that something had responded to me. The tape went into the deck without me deciding to do so. My hand acted before I thought. The voice that came through wasn't mine. Wasn't the echo from before. It was layered, plural. a chorus of many that didn't speak in unison but in succession. Each word passed like a baton. You've been seen. You've been marked. Now you will be shaped. The words echoed in my mind. Seen by whom? Marked for what? Shaped into what? I stared out the windshield, my breath shallow. These weren't just commands. They were stages, observation, branding, transformation. I wondered how far along I already was. Had I already begun to change without noticing? The symbol on my chest, the dreams, the quiet compliance of my body, all signs of a process I hadn't agreed to, but was already a part of. And now, I was being told that the next phase was underway. Shaping. The word lingered like a blade held just above the skin. The truck engine started on its own. Headlights flared against the garage wall. Outside the window, the world had bent. The trees leaned away. The road had split. To the left stretched a narrow stone slope, each rock face etched with the same geometric symbols that glowed on my chest. The path led upward toward a pulsing ridge, where the sky shimmered in jerking movements as if reality skipped forward in fractured pieces. It felt like an unfinished space, constantly adjusting itself. This was the way of service, I sensed, a path that led deeper into whatever world I had been inducted into. Duty, continuation, transformation. To the right lay a simple dirt road that descended into a landscape I remembered from before all this began. Flattened earth, soft clouds above, wooden posts strung with humming power lines. This was the return path, not to peace, but to consequence. That road offered familiarity, but with the burden of the mark I now carried. That was the road of debt, where I would live watched, altered, and likely hunted. I remained motionless, hands resting on the wheel. The symbol on my chest pulsed again, slow and deliberate. Their voices came from within, clear and commanding. The road forward carries duty. The road back carries debt. I gripped the wheel tighter. My pulse rose. These phrases weren't mere poetry. They were definitions, instructions bound to consequence, structured by what I had allowed myself to transform into. I shifted the gear into drive, and I steered left. The road narrowed, hemmed in by black trees and shallow ditches filled with standing water. The air thickened with static. Every few seconds, my ears would pop, like I was passing through invisible thresholds. Halfway up the slope, the truck stuttered. The lights dimmed. Then the dashboard lit up. The dashboard illuminated, revealing a map that had replaced all the usual indicators. There were no glyphs or warnings. A layout filled the screen, a destination, and two blinking points. One where I was, one where I had to be. A blinking red dot marked my location. A second dot flickered up ahead. When I reached it, I saw the man. He stood in the center of the road, arms at his sides, clothes tattered and soaked. His face looked familiar, as if I'd seen him in a mirror I didn't recall looking into. He was another deliverer, or had been. The symbol on his chest was charred. It had bled. The lines cracked outward like veins ruptured by heat. He stood still for a breathless moment, then lunged. I barely had time to react. I flung the truck door open and stumbled out, my foot catching on the gravel. He didn't come at me directly. His focus was on the seat, on the red-threaded pouch. He dove inside, fingers clawing for it. I reached in and grabbed his shoulder, yanking him back with every ounce of force I could gather. He twisted in my grip and screamed. The sound that came out was a sound stripped of intent, brittle and dry, like something cracked open after being sealed for too long. We struggled in the dirt, his weight pressing against me in erratic bursts. His nails tore at my sleeves and skin. His body moved with a desperate strength, like something hollow trying to fill itself. He sank his teeth into my shoulder, gnashing until I shoved him off. He landed hard, scraped his knees raw, and stared at me. His fingers left smears of blood on the ground. His eyes, clouded and featureless, locked onto mine with a terrible clarity. "They lied to me," he said, voice cracked and barely above a whisper. It carried no warning. His voice delivered a confession, plain and final. Then he slumped forward, unmoving. I stood over him, breathing hard. My shoulder throbbed, my hands trembled. I didn't bury him. I couldn't lift him. I wasn't sure I should. I got in the truck, shut the door, and kept driving. The second stop was marked by a statue, a child-sized figure carved from black stone. Its eyes had been painted white. The paint now ran like tears. I stepped out, the pouch in my hand. The delivery this time was a vial, filled with a clear liquid that shimmered in unnatural ways. I held it to the light. There was no reflection. Carved directly into the stone behind the statue were instructions that left no room for deviation. Anoint the eyes, do not speak. I removed the vial from the pouch, uncapped it, and raised it slowly. The liquid shimmered with a depth that made it seem alive. I approached the statue, steadying my hand, and carefully let the first drop touch one of the eyes. The instant the liquid made contact, a low groan issued from beneath the ground. Thin cracks spread out from where I stood, like a spider web etched into the dirt. A hiss followed, long, slow, and rising in pitch from somewhere deep below the surface. Then, everything stopped. The ground stilled, the sound ceased, but the sky had shifted. It now glowed a dull violet, casting everything around me in a strange, bruised hue. I backed away, walking quickly toward the truck. I didn't run, but each step came harder, faster, as if the air had thickened. When I reached the vehicle, I saw that the driver's side mirror was missing. In its place was something new where metal and glass should have been. A sheet of grayish skin had grown, stretched and featureless. I touched it. It was warm. Without hesitation, I entered the truck, started the engine, and continued driving. The road curved upward, winding around the slope. I climbed steadily until the trees parted and the sky opened. Ahead lay a vast clearing, ringed by blackened stone. At its center stood a dome of scorched rock, symbols burning faintly on its surface, markings I had seen before, throughout this entire journey. And at the center of the dome stood the object I'd been drawn toward all along. It wasn't a building, though it rose like one. It wasn't entirely a machine either, though it pulsed with internal energy. It was tall, skeletal, and open at the center like a massive doorway. But within that frame, the light did not behave like light. It bent inward, folding in impossible directions, as if gravity had been rewritten. Looking into it was like watching water pulled sideways by an unseen force. A voice emerged from the mark on my chest, steady and unshaken, speaking with the weight of ancient certainty. We did not choose you. You shaped yourself. I stepped closer to the structure. In one hand, I held the red threaded pouch filled with bone dust. In the other, the cassette, its label peeled at the corners, the tape inside loose and humming faintly. What happens if I go through? I asked. You become, the voice replied. And if I don't, you return. But you are never unmarked. I looked down at what I carried. The pouch felt cold now, heavier. The cassette pulsed in my palm, as though it contained something alive. The choice was clear, and so were its requirements. To move forward, I would have to burn the cassette. The voice had not said why, but the meaning hung in the air. It was a symbol of attachment, of identity. Destroying it meant surrendering what remained of the person I had been. To turn back, I would have to consume the dust, returning with the memory of this place etched into my flesh. I stood there, unmoving, calculating the cost of each path. The air trembled around me. The machine in front of me pulsed with a rhythm that echoed the beating of my heart. The stone beneath my feet grew warmer. The sky stretched in every direction like skin pulled taut. I breathed deep, raised the cassette, and let it catch fire in my hand. It burned fast and silent. I turned the pouch over and let the dust spill to the ground. The sky split open. A crack of pure white light spread across the heavens. The world rippled like fabric under strain. I stepped into the threshold. Light surrounded me, It did not overwhelm my vision with brightness. Instead, it moved with intent and rhythm, expanding and contracting as if alive. The light had substance, not harshness. It breathed around me, enveloping everything in a living glow. I felt it enter my skin, my thoughts. I didn't disappear. I expanded. I saw the system, no longer bound by maps and routes, but immersed in thought, energy, choices. I was inside a lattice of intentions. I saw other deliverers, some turned to mist, others looping paths forever. I saw the ones who'd tried to cheat the game and had become twisted reflections of themselves. Their minds still worked, but their forms no longer matched. The mark on my chest ignited, and I felt language flood into me, not with spoken words, but with structure, precise frameworks that carried understanding directly into thought. The dust had been the seed that initiated the path. Every delivery was a measured trial, designed to observe response, endurance, and adaptation. The encounters I faced were never random. They were structured exchanges between the known and the unknown, each one shaping the person I was becoming. Now, I stood in a place of observation. The system no longer studied me. I had joined it, fully conscious, fully aware. Below, I could see the compound laid out with clinical precision. Inside, another man stirred in the cot I had once occupied. His breath was shallow, uncertain. He had begun his path just as I once had. It all made sense now. I was not the conclusion of the process. I was its next stage. I had crossed the threshold, and by doing so, I had become part of the mechanism that draws others forward. And he would follow just like I did until he made his choice, until he stepped into the space where self is restructured. I am the threshold, a presence between one life and another. And I remember your name,